John St. Peter, welcome to the journey.
Thank you,
And
Kevin.
no problem. I'm glad you were able to join us. We've met a handful of times over the last year or so, 9 months, and we've always had interesting conversations. And just recently, we started a conversation, and just wanted to kind of just capture that a little bit more. But just for any new listeners that are listening, and I could just explain a little bit about what the journey is about. Um, the journey is essentially a show that just talks about what are those stories that we all have in some way of how we've had obstacles in our life, how we may have learned from those obstacles, maybe had situations where we were either stumbled or found ourselves having to face something and we found ourselves failing forward. And so it's really about stories of transformation, just about ordinary life and how we dealt with it. So
Right on.
I know that, as you mentioned to me before, you had a couple things go on in your life, and where you're at now is not where you've always been. So, but before we jump into all that, why don't you, if John has an opportunity to have some fun, what would we find you doing if you were having fun?
I'm pretty much game for anything. Don't ever tempt me with a good time.
Yeah.
Um, in my past, I've been a bowler for a long time. I like to ride my bike a lot. Just be outside. I'm sitting outside right now. I'm on my deck. It's raining a little bit, but it's nice. I'm enjoying it. Might be able to hear a little raindrop trickling behind me, but in general, I got off work at 5:30, and it's fair that I might sit out here till 11 o'clock at night before I go in. If I can breathe some fresh air and look at some trees, I'm a happy person. So
Sure. Okay. So I can totally relate to that, because that's where I get a lot of my rejuvenation, is being outside. And it may be, as if it's outside in some beautiful area like mountains or beach or something like that, but it also can be in my backyard or just going for a walk at a local park or something like that.
absolutely.
So now, John, are you from the Rockford area?
So I am actually a dual citizen. I was born in London, England, so I was a military brat. My
Okay.
parents met during Desert Storm,
Okay.
and came back here. Never have no recollection of being in across the pond, but been in Rockford most of my life. I'm 29, so I've been here probably 21 to 22 of those years. So
Okay. All right. And so both mom and dad were in the military?
yeah, that's where they met at.
Okay. Gotcha.
Mom is from here. Dad is from Springfield, Mass.
Okay. Okay. And mom and dad still together now?
Oh no.
No. Okay.
Truth be told, my first recollection or first memory of my father was at 5 years old. So they split before I ever knew
Oh, okay.
any
Okay.
wiser.
Gotcha. Okay. And so was mom stationed in England?
Yeah, they both were actually. They were. I believe they were. They were both on airplane handling, fuel handling. So I was born on Lakenheath Air Force Base,
Okay. All right.
and that is. Go ahead.
No, so you were born in England, born on the military base in England, and then your mom did her stint with the military, and then came back to the States.
No, she actually brought me back after a while, and then went back herself,
Oh,
and
okay.
then went, and then so I was left with some great family members here. And
Okay.
when her time was done, then she came back and met back up with me.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. And so your mom, you said she handled fuel when she was in the military, and for airplanes, right? And
Correct.
okay. And then how long was she in the military?
I couldn't tell you, to be honest with you.
Okay.
She did her 4 as best as I know, and that was a wrap. My dad actually retired, so my dad is retired he retired at Peterson Air Force Base in Colorado Springs, and he has lived there ever since.
Gotcha. Okay. Looks like we got a little bit of action going on in the background there, huh?
Yeah, I live right down the street from a nursing home, so excuse me, there's some sirens, but that's you got the constant fire truck, ambulance.
Gotcha.
It's
Okay.
going to roll by from time to time.
Sure,
So,
which
pardon
is
me.
a pretty unfortunate thing right now, especially with COVID and how COVID's been impacting, especially the elderly. I imagine it's probably even pre-COVID, you probably hear quite a bit of sirens, but I imagine it's been even a little bit scarier for them in the last year.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's like living next to the L train in Chicago. You almost don't even notice it anymore,
Sure.
to be
Yeah.
honest with you.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's. I'm sure it's pretty rough for a lot of people. Actually, even with the COVID, one of the big testing sites in town is at the U of I medical campus, and that's right down the street as well. So yeah, it's been pretty busy
Sure.
traffic wise for all this going on.
Sure. Yeah. Absolutely. So, going back. So now, do you have siblings?
I have a half brother.
Okay.
He is 7 years younger, so that would make him 22.
Okay. Okay. So younger brother, and so when he came along, mom was back. Obviously, mom was back here in the States during that time period. You were here in the States during that time period. And
Mm-hmm.
did you guys settle here in Rockford, or how?
We were well settled here. So my half brother is from my former stepfather. So we were well settled here when they met, and um, they got together here. Had my
Gotcha.
brother.
Okay. And so kind of give us a snapshot. What was John like growing up? So going through like grade school and middle school, what are some of your memories growing up, especially when those younger years in grade school and middle school?
I like to think I was generally pretty jovial. Neighborhood kid. Always very shy. I mean, it's kind of odd now to think back on it because I took a 16 personality test recently, and I identified as an ENTJ, which I can't remember what the last three letters are, but the first letter is an extrovert. But it's kind of on the fence for me because generally growing up, very introverted. It
Sure.
really I got along with people I got along with, but generally never could really identify with a social circle or knew where I kind of fit in at, and that's been a recurring theme for a lot of my life. Something I've had to come into as I mature.
So that was you really didn't find that set group of friends or set group of who you identify with growing up. Is that what you mean?
I did have a set group of friends, but I mean, a lot of as you're coming to age, going through grade school, into middle school, into high school, I always, I end up moving every 2 to 3 years
Oh,
or
okay.
so. You know what I mean? Just for whatever circumstance, there was always a varying one. So it was kind of, when I settled, then it was had to start over again, almost as soon as it became comfortable. So that was kind of odd because it's someone, I mean, now I make friends easier, but then I needed a lot more time to, take the situation and get to know people. Very
Sure.
shy as
Sure.
a child.
Okay, so that's an interesting aspect, and that definitely an opposite of my situation growing up. I had one moved middle of grade school, and then my parents still live in that house today, right? So I don't really have a frame of reference when you talk about moving every 2 to 3 years. And now,
Mm-hmm.
when you guys moved, was it moved within the Northern Illinois area, or was it like bigger moves than that?
Bigger, and there was one that was a kind of. Oh, sorry, got to get back to you. One in particular that kind of set an interesting tone for a lot of stuff going forward, and that was right when my mom and my stepfather became married, and a year later came my brother. But I remember I lived on the southeast side of Rockford, so Sandy Hollow area, and we had my sixth or maybe seventh birthday party one day, when we started that party, we had a moving truck loaded, and my mom was pregnant with my half brother, and literally had my birthday party the next day in the truck, moved to South Carolina the next day.
Oh, wow.
And so the circumstance with that was that my stepfather, because he was a aircraft mechanic, he had taken a job with a subsidiary of U.S. Air, or one of the bigger airlines, a regional carrier, and so we were in Columbia, South Carolina.
Okay.
So my mom transferred her job down there. She's worked for a big corporation, still does for quite some time. So she had an easy transfer. But my stepdad found a better job, took it, and kind of set in motion a lot of stuff that no one ever saw coming. And I wasn't the only affected, and I might have been one of the least affected people by the situation, but it had an effect. So the day we got there, unpacked, and my stepfather, he literally went to his job one day, and then that company filed bankruptcy the next day.
Oh, wow.
Which is, you don't even know, like, why'd you even waste your time moving us down there?
Sure.
You know what I mean?
Right.
And so that ended up being odd because my stepfather was already from the Carolinas. So he had a lot of family in the Charlotte area. So to kind of bail us out, if you will, you know what I mean? My mom kept her job where she was at. My dad took a job with stepdad took a job with U.S. Airways, but he was in Charlotte.
Okay.
It's a 2-hour difference between Columbia and Charlotte. So there was a lot of commuting going on, and it was just like, for the home life that we just kind of got, it just really just crashed down hard right there. You know, my mom just having a baby, and then, you know, and then his dad, had my half brother's dad having to work, and it was just kind of an uneasy time for a lot of people.
Sure.
So we did that for about a year, and then we were able to make it back this way. Okay. And we settled out in Loves Park, and that was probably the longest point I think I'd been settled in Loves Park. I was there from 3rd grade through 8th grade in the Harlem School District.
Okay.
And then my parents, mom and stepdad, they got divorced in that time. Ended up in my 8th grade year having to move into the Rockford School District. So Harlem was nice enough to let me finish out there. But then I had to start at Auburn High School, which was my choice. Area I live in, I had my pick of any school because I moved into the district. But I started at Auburn in 9th grade. And I can say great things from my time at Auburn. That school itself and that situation has a lot to do with who I am now as a person, because wow, culture shock. You know, I was at Harlem for 3rd to 8th grade, and now I'm at Auburn High School. You know, and so everything that I had thought to know or assume or learn about my peers there, I had a whole different thing going on over there. Right. But I'm very appreciative of it now as an adult. I'm kind of the opinion, and I'm of the opinion, not only from that, but just as Rockford's locale as a town, that, I mean, if you have the right mindset and you can take it right and learn from experience and just kind of being outside looking in, growing up in this area will make you humble anywhere you go. You will learn how to get along, or at least get by, pretty much anywhere in the world you might end up, I feel like, at least in my experience from being here. So there's a lot of uncertainty growing up and, you know, odd stuff going on, but generally, as I get into my own, I'm by myself now, it's very useful lessons taught.
Sure. Well, and you know, we talk about the idea of the importance in development, right? Of our psyche and development of who we are and where do we fit in, this idea of social learning, right? So you by far were the oldest of the offspring in the household. And so it was only looking outside of yourself at mom and stepdad, and then whatever peers you may have had around you about what makes the world make sense, right? And when we have that the instability of moving, and then even in your case, when you guys moved to the Carolinas, that was an unstable move, right? Not it might have
wasn't intended to be, but yes, it was. It was very unstable. Very unstable.
And you know, it's what we talk about all the time, is that if you get an opportunity for a better job and your spouse is able to transfer her job, it's a thing on a paper that makes sense. And so
correct.
In that case, your dad or your stepdad didn't have any control over, and probably didn't have the crystal ball polished up so he could see what was going to happen, you know. But
no, very much.
So when you think of like something that you learned, and maybe you've already spoken to it, but of moving as much as you did, what do you think that you learned about yourself, the fact of having to start and stop, you know, friend groups, schools, trying to figure out where things are at in the school, all those types of things. What things do you think you learned about yourself going through that process?
God, it's really, I don't know. I mean, I feel like I'll tell you what. Now that I think about it, um, it's kind of made me a great observer because and able to like I've been always been able to rationale another person's point of view without ever having to necessarily agree with the opinion myself. I can see both sides of the coin, whichever it is, or I can understand people's views because it put me in a very I'm always stuck on the outside looking in. You know what I mean? I had a couple of people I get along with, but generally never knew how to be a part of a larger peer group. You know what I mean? Because I was always, for one, being a shy person and having to work my way into having friends. And then when you finally do, we're on the move. You know what I mean? So it teaches you how to be very observant, and how to take things in. I mean, I was fortunate that even with all this stuff going on in my childhood, that I've always been kind of hard-headed. I've always had a lot of great people looking out for me and cared about me, wanted me to succeed, and would give me good advice. But unfortunately, I've always also been the kind of person that learns the things I know the hard way. Until I had a practical use for your advice, I would never actually embrace it. I wouldn't scoff at it. I'd just be like, yeah, you're deluded, whatever. You don't know what you're talking about.
Sure.
Because I hadn't had to see it on my own. So, as I become older and I realized I didn't know at the time that it gave me great observational skills, but as I'm maturing and, I'd realized that that's definitely a skill gained is how to just be able to be accepting of what's around you because I'm not the only person that's been in my position.
Sure.
I'm
Yeah.
far from the only person that's been in that position. So it gives you a keen eye towards just what everybody else is going through, because you never really know what anybody's plight or even their joy is. I mean, one of my favorite quotes to tell anybody, or not even quotes, but advice is, especially when people are having a bad day, is that, and this is relevant now in our day of social media, especially, is you can't compare your worst day to everybody else's highlight reel.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so easy to do now. It's so easy to have the worst day in the world and then flip on your Facebook as a distraction and everybody else just hit the lottery and you're just like, well, wow. What did I do? Nothing. You really, that's such that type of thinking will really do you in.
Yeah.
But so, yeah, I was able to just be observational.
Sure. Well, and I think, that's an interesting thing when you talk about what's something that you benefited from going through that, right? And and there is a difference. I mean, I grew up in Harlem. I started in Rockford, and then I moved to Harlem School District, and I was there from moved in fourth grade, didn't know anybody, and I was probably similar to yourself, that kind of shied, until seventh grade, and then there was this transition, and the thing that helped me transition and find that beginning to find where do I fit in was athletics, and
Okay.
athletics was that platform in which I could excel at, and my key to that acceleration in football specifically was because I had started weight training prior to that, and weight training was something I could control. And I was similar to yourself, shy and observed, and didn't necessarily even know that I could ask for help, um, and was embarrassed if I had to, because
Sounds familiar.
I thought it indicated that I wasn't paying attention or I wasn't smart enough already, and I didn't want to reveal that. So I would sit back and just kind of observe and wait. And it took me until I was in my early 20s to even be able to ask for, to be vulnerable enough to ask and have the courage to ask for help, right? In certain areas, Um, so when you think like in that time period, because going from Harlem, so you graduated from Auburn. What year did you graduate from Auburn?
2008.
2008. Okay. So you would have been at Harlem in the early 2000s, right? Um,
Correct.
about
I think
2000, like 2003, 2004 would have been the beginning of your eighth grade year, right around that time period. And so and even though there was beginning of some diversity, it still was pretty. It was still pretty lopsided. There was a small amount of minorities in the Harlem area, and then you go to Auburn, and at that time, well, just no different than today. It's a pretty. I guess you don't think of Auburn being an integrated school in Rockford, but I would say it's pretty evenly
Very diverse.
dispersed. Yeah,
Very diverse.
and then it also has, and did at that time too, the academy and the arts program, as well as the diversity, with the different races, different classes, different things going on. What was that like, switching? Were you involved with any extracurricular activities at all, or?
I bowled, but not too much more than that. When I was at Harlem, I was in the academic team,
Okay.
and so it was kind of hard when I had to make that switch to Auburn, because I remember, I tried to avoid it like hell, man, because they were calling all of us during 8th grade to go to the counselor's office to pick our classes for next year in 9th grade, and obviously I knew I wasn't going, so I tried to avoid the situation until I was the last one to go, and they called me by name, and they're in the office, and have to, kind of announce in front of my peer group that I'm not going to be seeing you guys, and they want to know why and where I'm going. And it was really hard, I guess, for me, because I had a tough pill to swallow, because I didn't, for one, I was surprised that those people knew my name at that point, you know what I mean? Because there was, with all due respect to everybody I went to school with, there was a lot of affluence that I didn't have in those academic teams at Harlem. And so it was, for one, I was just, not going to say an outcast, but just far from the popular person. You know what I mean? Select few friends. So to have to, like, announce it publicly, like, I'm not going to, and here's why, I was like, wow, like, yeah. But so I went to Auburn, and I didn't test in for the academy again. I think I was just kind of done with it.
Okay.
As a kid, when I was in middle school and so on, it was kind of pushed into it. It was just easy. I fell right into it. They give you a test. Okay, that's what team you're going to, and this happens to be it. And it was a good experience, because I got a lot of extra classes and electives that, if you were necessarily in the main line, if you will, that you would not have gotten. So I enjoyed it. But I think by the time I got to Auburn, in 9th grade, I was kind of overwhelmed by everything. I just wasn't ready to do that work. I knew what it entailed. I didn't want to take AP classes. I just wanted to just kind of get by and figure out what I was doing, so I had no interest in putting that level of work in when I got there. So, I was happy just to get my 6 classes out of the way a day and go home, pretty much, and get back to something familiar. I went largely unknown to most people my entire freshman year. You could have ran over me and no one would have known. And that was all right. But sophomore year, junior year, kind of grow into it more. You eventually get more settled and go on. It was a good experience. But, yeah, as far as extracurriculars, I kind of left most of them alone. I was on the bowling team. But I did have one really good teacher that I kind of identified with my first year. He's retired now. He moved back to Ghana, was where he was from. But he was my intro to business tech teacher. And that was my first period class, my first day freshman year. So I took his class, identified well with him, continued on taking his classes my junior and senior year. I was his teacher's assistant, as well as doing independent study classes. So I guess that was my lane, and I kind of just stayed in it,
Sure. Right. Yeah. Well, and again, going back to what you had said earlier, was this role of maybe survival, maybe it was just trying to figure things out, was to observe and not put yourself too far out there until you know that it's safe enough to put yourself out there. And
it's almost not even a safety thing, but in the reality, I had no idea how to put myself out there. I was just, I don't know. I don't really know a great way to describe it. It was just putting myself out there was not even a thing. You know what I mean? It was just kind of as it comes along, and as you get to meet people kind of by accident or by common interests that you didn't know you had. You know what I mean? Whether it's like sat next to you in class and turns out that, man, we like the same pen. That's something we can talk about. We both use the Bic, whatever, So it wasn't anything I'm not going to say it was dull. I definitely had interest and emotion, but there wasn't anything for me to really put out that I felt like people would take notice of. Some people are very, I don't know, some people to stand out in the crowd no matter what, or some people want to, whereas I just wanted to put my head down, do my homework, and go home.
Gotcha,
kind of
gotcha,
deal.
gotcha. And so then that idea of really observation was something that was happening, but it wasn't necessarily a conscious thing. It was more of something that you were doing, and then later look back on and say, okay, yeah, this is something that I started maybe because of these reasons, but it wasn't necessarily an intentional thing. It was
Oh yeah,
more.
not at all. No
Gotcha.
idea.
Okay. So high school wraps up, right? And then those questions, always come up as people finishing up high school or going into their senior year or whatever it may be, regardless if it's someone at the school or someone else in your life. So, okay, so what are you going to do next year? What are you going to do when you finish? What did you ended up doing when high school left?
I stayed with the same job that I had, which is not the same one I have now, but in the same building that you know me from.
Okay.
My high school job, I stayed with that until I kind of got tired of it and branched out into, I guess, what you would call the real world, and started taking on jobs and going with it, and still really no direction, no idea what I was doing. You know what I mean? It was funny because, like, I had a friend ask me the other day about what I do, and he was comparing me to somebody else. And I kind of had to tell him, I was like, your opinion is kind of off because you're saying that this person is not capable of doing this, and you're using me as the comparison. But the reality is, what they're doing, they do it at 21. You saw me start doing it at 24 or 25, and there's no way at 21 I could do at 21 what I do at 30. You know what I mean? So it's been a really just, I had no idea what my acumen even was. Even if I knew it, like you said, I was not conscious of it. I had no idea what I was going to take to or not. I really was just kind of going through the motions. Let me get some money, pay some bills, get by, have some fun.
Sure.
Whatever. There wasn't a whole lot of direction there,
Yeah.
to be honest with you.
So, well, obviously, with because that's how we got to know each other through Don Carter Lanes, right? So being there and through the Wild Onion, brewery or tap room, I guess it would be called, right? And so, when did you start out working with Don Carter's, or with that particular group, or that particular bowling alley, or was that
I started there. That was my first job. I was 16 years old, and I just worked out on the lanes, cleaning up. And it was weird because I noticed, and this is really where I kind of started to kind of come into my own or be my own personality, be identified, if you will, is because when I was in 17, 18, I would get complimented. If I went to someone's party or whatever, they'd be like, wow, you're very mature. And I'm like, the reality is I'm not very mature. I'm just kind of that dull to the situation. You know what I mean? Just so unaware of what's happening here. But so my peer group towards the end of high school really started to change, and it was because I always felt out of place with what you would assume would be a normal person's peer group, which would be the people at your age.
Mm-hmm.
And as it turned out, the people that, when I was working at the bowling alley, that I really got along well with was some of my managers that were much older than me. Not much older, but they were in the 23, 24, 25-ish. And then a lot of the bar staff could have been in the same way, age up to 40 or so, you know what I mean? And as a young kid, I don't know why, but something about my outlandishness is something that these people much older than me took an interest to, and that became my peer group. And that was the people that I really started to, learn everything I didn't need to know at that age, but everything I kind of needed to know at the same time. I like to give a lot of my good friends crap about it now because I'm like, hey, do you realize that the age I am now was the same age that you were when I started hanging out with you, except I was 16 or 17, and they're like, well, thanks for making me feel old, man. But I'm like, it's not like that, but it's a compliment, if anything. But so that's, I guess, I always fit into a crowd that was maybe a little past me, but I guess that was my speed.
Sure. That's interesting you say that, because that was very much because I grew up in the gym and started bodybuilding real young, and that was a because I was quiet and because I worked hard. Those two things ended up making you look older than people your own age, right?
Yeah,
And
definitely.
and that goes a long ways with people that are five plus years older than you, because they forget. Because if you're being quiet and work hard and you're attentive to what's going on, um, that, that age piece is gonna get overlooked pretty quickly, because really, if they're in their early to mid 20s, they're not all that mature either. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I know it was a trip because a lot of them were. I remember one time a few of them knew how old I were, and they decided when I turned 18, or the same thing when I graduated high school, they threw me parties for both of these things. And they're like, and a lot of people that come to the party, they're like, what are we throwing this party for? And they're like, we're throwing it for John. I'm like, what about him? Oh, he graduated high school. They're like, wow, did he graduate 3 years late? And they're like, no, he's actually early, but they're like, well, oh crap, we thought this dude was the same age just the whole time, and that's not clearly not the case at all.
Sure.
But
Well, it's always an interesting thing. I started with my own journey, and then my journey in the counseling world. One of the things that I ended up really taking an interest in was what they call men's work, or men's psychology. And an aspect of that, they talk about the importance of a role of someone being either a mentor or speaking into someone. And for us as men, that there's a level of us as young as boys needing to have someone coach us, mentor us, pull something out of us that we may not be able to see ourselves. So this idea that we ask a 15-year-old or a 17-year-old, who are you and what do you want to be? We don't have a clue. If someone hasn't worked with us to work with us with that question, we're either gonna completely just make something up just so they'll stop asking, or we're just gonna like shrug our shoulders and I don't know, right? Because it's not something, without that guidance, without someone working with us to pull that out and show us what we can be, none of us are going to come to that, right? And,
right,
and just because someone who's 12 years old says, oh yep, I'm going to be a doctor, and then they end up being a doctor, and it happened to be that their father, grandfather, and mother and grandmother were doctors, that doesn't necessarily tell me that's what they really were going to be. It's what it was, the framework in which you grew up in, um, and so I think, when you said about not really coming to your own until you were in your mid 20s and really started piecing some things together, I think, I don't know how abnormal that is. If there wasn't those early relationships getting breathed into you, where you could be led, that you could trusted that this person was helping facilitate a path for you,
correct.
and that's different than someone, kind of like the example I used earlier, going, yep, you're pretty bright, you're going to be an attorney, when you don't have any desire to do that, right? I mean, and so I think there's a difference between someone coaching us into our gifts, versus and helping us discover what those are, versus someone either completely ignoring us or appointing it to us. And
Yeah.
I think some of the best examples that I ever saw, that, and again, going back to coaching, is I remember a coach that I used to work with, and he had a great eye for individuals in what position they could play. He would take
Okay.
a kid that loved and wanted to be a running back, but he wasn't super fast, and at best he was going to probably be a second or third string running back. And
Right.
he would look at him and watch him in practice, and he would walk up to him and said, if you want to start, I have a position for you. Well, of course the kid wants to start, right? He goes, you will probably be a second or third string running back, but you could be a starting guard. You could possibly be an all conference guard. If you want to be all conference, follow me. Well, that coach saw something in that guy that could bring him to, a peak of who, what his talent could bring, versus an image of what he thought he could be, and
Oh yeah, and I've experienced that in my life, and it took a while. But when I was 24, 25, I just moved back to town from Milwaukee. I moved up there for my job, and I just, God, I hated my life there, hated me there, had to shake it up. I can say, if anything about me, I've never been afraid to shake it up for better or worse, you know, but if I felt like it's what I needed to do, is what I did. And so I came back here and was here for about a year and wasn't really keen about what I was doing. What I fell into then, I was like, that's when I decided I want to start bartending. You know, I've been around it. I had the practical knowledge of it, never had to put it to practice before. You know, it was kind of a nice when I started that I had a good acumen or good observation knowledge of what was going on before I actually ever had to do it. It was a benefit to me, you know, compared to a lot of people, how they fall into it. But I had this, I found this Craigslist ad, and it was for a small restaurant group. It's not around anymore, but it was a guy and his wife that ran it. And I just kind of called him up one day, and I was like, hey, this is what I'm trying to do, and looks like you guys are hiring. Can I come interview today? And they're like, well, wow, sure, that'd be perfect. You know, and so I met them, and they hired me that day, and as I got to talking to these people, they were very, very great people, and this is kind of where I learned, you know, about how to be deliberate and intentional, and how to, you know, when you have conversations with people, how to make it count, you know. And so, but they said something really interesting to me, because, you know, as I came in with an idea of what I was going to do, and it had been my first time doing it, but like I said, had the background knowledge, and they're like, well, I know that's what you want to do, and you're going to do that, but at the same time, like, we're going to have you do some other things too. And I'm like, well, why is that? And they're like, for one, we really get the impression that you don't need to be told when to do things. You know, you might need to be told how, but you don't need to be told when. And that's the more important part. If we need help, you can call and ask. We'll give you directions or whatever. But you don't need to be told when to do. We don't need to hold your hand. They said, second of all, we just think you have some stuff and we want to stretch you. You know, we want to not necessarily mold you, but we want to pull you in directions that we don't even know if you know you want to be pulled or not, but we think it's for your better. And that's what we're going to do. So we're going to make your life hard, but you're going to learn and you'll be better for it. It's kind of, okay, you're my boss, so, you know, I can't tell you no. But I mean, looking back on it, now that you mention it, that was a very, even though I only worked for that restaurant group for a summer and then moved on, it was still a really good experience. It was, you know, the first time that I actually kind of had somebody maybe not take an interest in me or my ability that I didn't know I had, but actually be very upfront about the fact that they thought I had it and they had motivations to see that improve and go farther. Sure. So it's always great when you run into people like that.
You know, there's a author that I came across, I don't know, maybe 10 plus years ago, and he talked about this idea that within us as men, as the male part of us, we need to know, and we need to know that someone who we believe knows, right? Mm-hmm. If we have what it takes, right? So there's something about within that masculine part of us that needs to know, do I have what it takes, right? And if someone believes in it, even though we're like that part of us that goes, oh shit, we might I don't know how this is going to go. Yeah, right. But there's enough there that intrigues us to say, okay, I got to follow this. And we may not hear it exactly in those words, right? You know, you have what it takes, but it's kind of like what you just said. You know, we think you have what it takes to stretch us, you know, or however they said that spoke to something deeper within you to put yourself out there. And you already wanted to be in that industry, or at least try it, right? And so, right. So I think there's something about that piece of it. And in equally, I think there's an aspect that the same author talks about, this idea for the feminine heart, has wanting to be able to unveil a beauty. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a physical beauty. I mean, that's great, but it may also be, you know, creativity, or, you know, a mental aspect. I remember working with a lady one time. This was that classic girl that was always the prettiest girl in the room, right? Growing up, she was always the cutest girl, and all through middle school, high school, college, she was always the prettiest girl in the room. And I remember her coming back from a workshop that she was doing with a new job she had, and she said, Kevin, they thought I was smart, not just pretty.
That's a beautiful thing.
That is exactly it motivated her to such a degree because someone had seen that there was more than just the physical piece, right? And I think for us as men, that masculine part of us, we, you know, yeah, it's okay to get by, but there's also that piece we got to know: can I do can I do more? Can I actually see if I'm tested? Can I actually see how I show up? You know?
Right. And so back to these. That's a very good point. And to back to this particular group of owners that I was talking about. So I was very much on the reverse side of the beauty queen that you were talking about, was where growing up, I was told very often, like, wow, you're the smartest person I know. You're also the dumbest smart person I know. And that's been very true plenty of times in my life. You know what I mean? Just like I said, don't tell me it was a good time. But so these were the first people that actually kind of outright kind of gave me the impression. They're like, wow, we can see you're smart. And I'm sure people tell you that, but now we're going to make you look pretty. We're going to use what you have that you don't know how to use.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to use that to show you how to put yourself on and actually do something with it.
Sure.
Like, so everything you have in you that you have no idea what to wake up in the morning and do with, we're going to show you how to put that to practice now. So it's very flip side of that coin, but very much the same thing.
Oh yeah, yeah, and I think that's the key when you have some coach or mentor or somebody who, if they see that part that we can't see, or the event or the situation, that's what's revealed in it, and then the doors are open, right? And so when we start venturing through that, so when you think about that that summer, right, and the things that you learned from there, what, and I know that even just recently you had to go through some stuff just recently with with the COVID thing, and there was the aspect of, I think you had to find another job, right? You had to do a different job, not at Don Carter's, but your full-time job.
So you asked about the whole COVID and job change and stuff, and so I was already pre-COVID. I already knew that I was getting into the job market. That was
Yeah.
going to be a thing, So, granted, I wasn't really affected too much pandemic-wise, like a lot of people were.
Okay.
But I also was able to find a nice opportunity to kind of get back to a lot of my roots in chemical handling, material handling. I have a background in chemical blending and so on. So I was able to kind of get out of one industry as a full-time gig and then make that more of a part-time thing, which is where we run into each other at, and then get into change my trajectory a little bit and get back into a little more of a 9 to 5. And so it's been pretty nice. It's definitely given me more time in my day. I don't have to work so many nights anymore. It's a little less stressful. You don't have so many people pulling at you every next direction you go. So it's been really kind of a nice experience. I think I came out of this, or even though we're still in the middle of it, pandemic wise, it definitely kind of came out of it a lot better. I wasn't affected negatively by it.
Sure.
So I feel very, very fortunate in that regard.
Yeah.
Because I know a lot of people have struggled so hard. It's so unfortunate, to see a lot what's going on in the world and taking place because of this stuff. So like I said, I really do feel very well off about it.
Well, and I think, though, even with that being said, I think that it is a combination of different things. This is, as I've listened to you, share tonight your story and different things that, were, decisions that were made in your life that you didn't have much control over. You didn't have much control over what decisions were being made. You just had control over what you were going to do once the decisions were made, right? I mean, it's kind of like you may not have been able to decide where you were going to move to and when you were younger and stuff, but you had to kind of figure out, okay, what am I going to do with this? How am I going to go about that? And similar to kind of opportunities, when someone spoke into you and said, I think you can be more than what you think you could be with this, and I think that aspect of just even this last situation that happened, well, it wasn't a good fit where you were at. it was, and obviously if it was in the restaurant business, obviously that was making huge changes because of all the restrictions that COVID placed on everything. And um and so instead of trying to force something to, force a round peg into a square hole, you pivoted, and then there was a better door that you walk through.
Yeah, it's actually really funny that you mentioned that square peg in the round hole, because I heard that recently, and that was from one of my long-term acquaintances who I actually watched your podcast with last night, and that would have been Mr. Clyde Henderson. And
Oh, really?
I've known Clyde probably half my life just from being around the bowl now. I mean him go back a long way, and I know that he mentioned that same circumstance in your
Yeah.
guys' time talking. But yeah, a lot of what you said and taking interest that happened with my new gig too, because a lot of my time I was trying to kind of force my hand and look for an opportunity, and sometimes a lot of times you have to create your own success. And I was really looking to do that, and unfortunately, it just wasn't panning out the way I wanted to. And then so when I kind of did a bit of an about face, even though I wasn't planning on it, just threw in an application, and the last people I expected to picked it up, and I ended up being their number one pick out of probably a couple hundred applicants from what I hear. But the VP of this company, as he interviewed me, he even kind of told me, I'm not really sure if you know that you want to be here or not, but we want to take a chance to show you that we think that you do want to be here. And so I said, when you put it like that, I feel like I owe myself the time and you guys to, run with this. And so I have, and it's been a great experience so far. No complaints.
Good deal. Good deal. Well, John, I really appreciate, well, I always appreciate the conversations that we have, and the opportunity to have to talk about different things. And usually it's just, a little bit more observations or just different things that we see, when our paths cross. But if there was something that you wanted to share with the people who are listening today, if there was something you'd want them to take away from the last, 45 minutes or so that we've been talking, what would be one thing that you would want them to kind of take away, or something that maybe even in your own life that you kind of reflect on that you'd want somebody to hear if they need to hear one thing?
Oh, it's the first thing that comes to mind has got to be a combination of, for one, we've been talking about, and then for two, along with the whole pandemic thing. Like I said, my favorite part about the whole COVID and the stay-at-home order was that my best part about it, and me and my friends talked a lot about this, was, man, hopefully everyone realizes that, now it's a great time just to slow down. You know what I mean? Hopefully everybody can get that, because the world and technology, it's clicking so fast. You know what I mean? It multiplies by the second, and it gets overwhelming and you get lost. So, I mean, it's a great time. Don't ever be afraid at any time to stop and think for yourself. You know what I mean? See what's out there, do some self-reflection. And I mean, maybe you're not always going to find the answer you want, but, it's kind of, don't be afraid to switch it up and do something different. Have some faith in yourself. I've always been had a way of surprising myself. Every time I've done something new, I've been scared of it, or I don't know if this could be a fit for me, and I've actually been able to most things take and be successful with it. So you really never know where your silver lining is going to come in. So don't be afraid of yourself, because I've spent a lot of my life not knowing who I was and being very afraid of myself and not really knowing what I was capable of. And it's a fluid journey. I still really don't 100%, but I'm starting to learn as I progress that, hey, like, usually things aren't as bad as they seem. Stop being your own worst enemy and just have some trust in you.
Sure, sure. And I think that is great for, especially, uh, you know, individuals in their 20s and 30s, that it's, that fear of stepping out and doing something new. And if you have some people that are believing a little bit in you, and even though it's scary and there's a possibility of that failure's there, well, if it wasn't worth possibly success, well, the possible failure went there. In business, we talk about if there's low risk, well, you should plan on low returns. The higher the risk, there's a greater possibility that you're going to have greater rewards. But we have to push through some of our own fears, some of our own obstacles that get in our way. Usually has to do with us, and it's usually between our ears. Um,
That's, yeah, very true, very true.
So, John, I appreciate you spending a portion of your evening with us tonight and having this conversation. And I know that for me, I've definitely gotten to know you better and know a little bit more about who you are as a person and what you've learned along your way, and what you've been able to pivot and adapt and kind of move forward through some doorways that were open for you. So.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. It's always great to sit down and talk with you. I'm sure we will do a little more of this in the future. Maybe it's on here, or if not, most definitely in person. So I look forward to it. Thank you for your time. Thank you for
Yeah,
having me. So
yeah.
it's my first experience with anything like this. I think it's probably my first or second video chat in my life. So
Okay. Well,
it's all new, but it's exciting.
all right. Well, you did great. Again, John, you be safe, especially with everything going on right now, and you keep taking care of you. All right. We'll talk to you
You,
soon. Okay.
yeah, later, brother. Have a good night.
All right.